Amongst their family and friends, members of the 41 Wing Unit's recent efforts in Afghanistan were finally recognised.
What we had to do was coordinate all the movements of aircraft throughout the airspace, whether they were civvies, transport aircraft or the combat aircraft. So our role was to make sure that everyone got to do in the airspace what they had to do and do it safely.
The 40 men and women were presented with the Australian Active Service Medal, Afghanistan Service Medal and the Iraq Medal during a ceremony at the Williamtown RAF base. The 6 months they spent overseas described as the experience of a lifetime.
It was absolutely the highlight of my professional career.
While these officers returned to Australia some months ago, 70 members of the crew are still serving in Afghanistan.
Feels great to be home. You are, however, very aware that your brothers in arms are still over there, but it's nice to be home and be back with family and loved ones.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
18 months ago, you would have struggled to get a builder. Now they're looking for you.
Times are getting quieter for the residential builders, so we're getting members who are saying that they're quiet and they're certainly looking for work.
NBA boss Len Blakeney has been fielding more and more calls from worried builders over recent months. Their cash flow is drying up and there are few new jobs on the horizon. The high-profile collapse of Beechwood Homes and Excellence Developments has added to the sombre tone. But Mr Blakeney says the industry is still generally sound.
We've got to realise that out of the hundreds and thousands of builders that are in the area and contractors that are in the area, we've only seen the collapse of 3 building firms at this stage in this 12 months, so it's not a major number.
Even so, there's no denying times are tough on the Hunters building sites. The NBA says it'll be at least another 12 months before there's a turnaround, dependent on interest rates. But out of all the gloom, there is a bright note, at least for the dwindling number of cashed-up consumers.
If anyone's looking at building a house or renovating, do it now. The opportunities are there to grab a good builder.
In 1926, coal mining of the land surrounding Glenrock Lagoon came to an end, but it wasn't before the area had been stripped bare for the collier and its related infrastructure. Then, in the mid-70s, 15 acres of the site was given to the Scouts by BHP, and an ambitious project to rejuvenate the land began.
Well, the challenge was getting rid of all the weeds, the lantana, bido bush and all those nasties. And once we had that space, and we started planting and regeneration naturally.
Teams of volunteers known as the Thursday Group have spent the past 3 decades planting thousands of native trees and shrubs and have slowly brought the area back to the way it might have looked originally. The wildlife has even returned.
It's been one of those ongoing things. It hasn't been something that's happened in a moment.
Most of the trees have been strategically planted to provide windbreaks and protected areas for camping. Needless to say, the volunteers behind the environmentally friendly project are pretty proud of their accomplishment.
This is Newcastle's best kept secret.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
With Ben Cross and Jesse Royal out of action and Danny Wicks fighting to be fit, the Knights are low on troops up front. The remaining forwards seem to be taking it in their stride.
No pressure there, mate. We've got a good forward pack there. We're all got a bit of experience under our belt now, so we'll turn up on the day.
Both the Knights and Panthers are fighting to scrape into the semi-finals, but coach Brian Smith believes it's not the only thing they have in common.
Last weekend they showed some tremendous things in the game against Para and were comfortably the best team, but on other occasions they've not been quite so good. Sounds a bit familiar.
Teams heading to the foot of the mountains always receive a frosty reception. This week's cold snap in Newcastle providing the ideal preparation.
The weather's putting it on for us at the moment. It's pretty chilly up here, but it's always cold down there. But in saying that, we've had some good success in the past, so hopefully we can repeat that.
The Knights know they have to improve, but after some tough calls against the Dragons, they wouldn't mind if their luck changed as well.
To be fair, out of last weekend's game, if it was played again and the game was adjudicated differently, I think we'd have been a fair chance of winning it.
The effort's there. I think against the Dragons, I think the effort was there, and a few different calls didn't go our way, but that's life, and we've just got to get on with it.
Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
You know, at the end of last season, we did try and get a new attacking midfielder, and it's been well stated we're looking for it, but we couldn't find anybody that come up to the standard that Gooms has set, so hence the re-signing of Andre.
I'm only in the bench press only in this championship due to a back injury the last few weeks, and I'll hopefully be benching in excess of 200 kilos.
Former Aboriginal Affairs Minister and Swansea MP Milton Orkopoulos is serving 9 years in jail for a string of child sex and drugs offences. Now, an inquiry has been ordered into the treatment of his former electorate officer Gillian Snedden, who was sacked after blowing the whistle on Orkopoulos's sordid activities. But the inquiry will be held by a government committee, and 8 of the 13 members involved are from the ALP, prompting fears that the inquiry won't be impartial.
I don't know that I will get a fair go at all. In fact, I very much doubt that I will, but it's all I've got.
The committee includes local MPs Frank Terenzini, Jodie McKay, and even the new member for Swansea, Robert Coombs, whose office sacked Ms Snedden.
Those members have the opportunity to make sure that this inquiry is conducted properly and openly, and all of the necessary witnesses are called to give evidence at that inquiry to get to the bottom of how Gillian Snedden was treated. Or they can follow the direction of Labor Party head office and shut it down.
Ms Snedden is worried that the very party which she says has made her life hell is now being given the task of investigating its treatment of her.
Labor have done everything they possibly can to destroy me.
Paul Lobb, NBN News.
These residents have had enough. For the past 14 months, New Commons Street southbound lane has been blocked to traffic and pedestrians to keep them away from the wall surrounding James Fletcher Hospital.
People can't walk along the footpath because it's not safe. Traffic can't go along there because it'll cause the wall to fall down. We can't have any weight there at all.
Today they held a protest, airing their grievances to Newcastle's Lord Mayor and the city's state representative, demanding the wall, which was severely eroded during last year's June storms, be finally fixed and the road reopened.
It's an ugly eyesore. What we need is someone to actually take responsibility for it.
But that's the problem, with Council, Hunter New England Health and the Premier's Department passing the buck about who should pay for the costly repairs.
Whose responsibility it is ultimately is difficult to say at this stage. I keep an open mind about that.
By the end of the protest, no promises had been made, leaving some residents disappointed.
There's a lot of very worrying aspects to this, and a lot of walking around in circles and getting nowhere.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
$260 Newcastle homes were chosen for the audit to see whether we've improved our bin habit since 2004. However, just 217 homes put their rubbish out regularly enough to be surveyed, an interesting statistic in itself.
But the actual amount of waste in the bins has not changed since 2004. It remains at around 17 kilos per bin and a fill rate of about 60% of the bin.
The preliminary data is still being analysed by the Sydney environmental consultant that conducted the audit, but already we know that despite ongoing recycling campaigns, the amount of greenery and compostable food waste being thrown out has increased and now accounts for more than half of our bin's contents. Encouragingly, the total amount of recyclable materials like glass, paper, plastic and metals has only increased by 1%, although we're disposing of more packaging than before.
What we've got to do is now get out the message that we need people to have a look at the packaging that they're actually purchasing, and just to make sure that they actually dispose of it properly.
Surprisingly, there's a new player taking up increasing space in landfill.
Approximately 40 kilos of mobile phones, which is about 200 mobile phones, were presented in those 217 properties.
Audits were also conducted in Cessnock, Lake Macquarie and Maitland. Penny Evans, NBN News.
It started 10 years ago as a festival for anyone with a camera and 24 hours to spare. These days, shootout is serious business, with some crews spending thousands on their films. Even the judging panel reads like a celebrity A-list, this year featuring 2 stars from Underbelly.
The shootout's really made an impression in the Sydney industry, and I think now it's just so much easier when we ask judges to come and judge for us. They actually know who we are.
The competition begins in Hamilton tonight at 9 o'clock. While film buffs do their stuff, the faithful will be exploring the region. Thousands of pilgrims have set up camp in the Hunter, and today groups from South Africa and Mexico were doing their bit for our environment, experiencing a unique part of Australia.
It's very, very good to see what I have seen. I have had a very good time here in Australia, and all my friends also.
The activity tying in with their theme of making the world a better place.
Yes, to meet people from all over the world and share all of our experience and what we would like to change.
Their generous nature even helped to make this reporter feel like a star, at least for one day. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
Get these guys on a start line and it's hard to hold them back, especially when one of them has the Australian Championship in his sights. Winning 5 of the 6 rounds contested so far this season, you'd think Chris Hollis would carry a weight of expectation at this weekend's Australian Championship rounds at Guandolen. But he reckons the opposite, with the onus on his opposition to play catch-up.
Hopefully I can win both days and extend my points lead again, and that would be really good. But if not, I'll just ride smart and settle for second or third if I have to.
The trouble will be holding back that competitive urge as he keeps the pace on to go one better than his runner-up placing for the title last year.
I definitely think about it a lot, but I think it sort of motivates you and keeps you focused on the job ahead.
Damien Smith can't wait to race. From neighbouring Gillaby, he grew up riding on this track, and despite giving away a few years to his younger rivals these days, it's experience and enthusiasm that they'll have to match.
If you sit back and try and work it out from afar, it's gone. The race is over, so you just got to go out as hard as you can and hopefully it works for you.
Riders face a time trial tomorrow with a cross-country format set down for Sunday's round. Jim Callanan, NBN News.
"18 months ago, you would have struggled to get a builder. Now they're looking for you. Times are getting quieter for the residential builders, so we're getting members who are saying that they're quiet and they're certainly looking for work.
NBA boss Len Blakeney has been fielding more and more calls from worried builders over recent months. Their cash flow is drying up and there are few new jobs on the horizon. The high-profile collapse of Beechwood Homes and Excellence Developments has added to the sombre tone. But Mr Blakeney says the industry is still generally sound.
We've got to realise that out of the hundreds and thousands of builders that are in the area and contractors that are in the area, we've only seen the collapse of 3 building firms at this stage in this 12 months, so it's not a major number.
Even so, there's no denying times are tough on the Hunters building sites. The NBA says it'll be at least another 12 months before there's a turnaround, dependent on interest rates. But out of all the gloom, there is a bright note, at least for the dwindling number of cashed-up consumers.
If anyone's looking at building a house or renovating, do it now. The opportunities are there to grab a good builder.
Police boats from Sydney have begun to assemble in Newcastle Harbour, while secure buses have also arrived in the city ahead of tomorrow's planned climate change protest. Hundreds of environmentalists are now camped in the city. Today they held a peaceful protest forming a giant clock with the phrase "cut carbon now or never." But police have learned tomorrow's action could turn violent.
Things like charging police lines, throwing missiles at police could certainly be some of the conduct that some of the people who are planning to attend this protest have in mind to do.
But according to the Climate Camp's organiser Georgina Woods, those sorts of actions aren't part of the plan. However, she did say the group is still planning to walk onto a railway line tomorrow to stop coal trains on the way to the terminal. If that happens, police won't hesitate to enforce the law.
I won't allow unlawful activity to unfold on rail infrastructure, but more importantly against my police officers.
Madeline Bond, NBN News. It's a film festival unlike any other. Teams have just 24 hours to make their masterpiece before it's submitted for judging.
Well, our film's actually about the Pope. He falls asleep on his way to World Youth Day, ends up in Newcastle and accidentally gets involved in a protest.
This year, 100 teams or 2,000 entrants are taking part in the shootout.
We're up from Melbourne, so we're very excited to be part of the Newcastle shootout. This is our first time, and we've got a kind of a comedy kind of thing happening.
Although Telstra mightn't think this scene was quite so amusing. But the films aren't just about action, with some clever scripting too. Now in its 10th year, locals are getting used to the festival and even joining the action. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Nguama struggled for much of the game, troubled by a foot problem, which is the major worry out of last night's game. Scans on Monday will confirm the extent of the problem, but if fears of a break or stress fracture are correct, it could sideline him for some weeks. Chris Bailey is also in some doubt for the coming match against the Sharks with a thigh problem. There's no doubting the win has revived semi-final hopes, but the coach tried his best not to talk about the 10-4 penalty count against them.
Not going near that.
A pretty gutsy win though, wasn't it?
Absolutely, that's what we should be talking about. Absolutely.
In Newcastle Rugby League, it was a top-of-the-table clash at Cessnock with the Goannas hosting West, and it was the visitors who turned defence into attack in the blink of an eye. It was a tit-for-tat battle for the full 80 minutes, with the latter leaders forced to work hard. But West seemed to come up with the plays that count at this time of the year. And if this is any indication, it's proof the Rosellas are gaining momentum nicely as they head towards the finals.
The protest started out peacefully enough. Environmentalists marched from Islington Park along Maitland Road and to the Carrington Coal Terminal to raise awareness about climate change. Hundreds of police escorted the group. It was only once they neared their destination that problems began. These protesters refused to finish the march, choosing instead to taunt and dance in front of police, before lying down on the ground. Mounted officers eventually used force to get them to move. And it wasn't long before the arrests began. From the outset, protesters vowed to walk onto train lines to shut down the coal chain. 2.5 hours into the rally, protesters had success, climbing not only onto train tracks but onto trains themselves, though they didn't stay there long. Environmentalists say the action was a success.
The coal trains into Carrington Coal Terminal have been stopped for the entire time that we've been here.
37 activists were arrested. Police say their sheer numbers prevented more people from making it onto the tracks.
The right number were in place and the right number will be here tomorrow.
That's when more protests are expected. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Policing services for this area are going to be better delivered. The communities policing is going to be more in touch with the communities that they serve.
It was just what you'd expect from a top-of-the-table clash, hard and mostly fair. Broadmeadow enjoying the lion's share of possession and position, but turning all that into points eluded them. Despite few chances, Hamilton almost stole the opener, care of Peter Junknowitz. The breakthrough coming on the half-hour mark, Peter Haynes the provider, Mason Palmieri with the precision finish. Haynes found himself in the middle of things again in the second half, rounding the defence to easily put home magic second, but also spark a raft of protests from Olympic players who made claims of offside. You don't beat the man in the middle in those sorts of arguments. The drama continued. Hamilton then awarded a shot from the spot and Junknowitz squeezed it home to halve the lead. But even that ended on a sour note with Murray Fletcher booked. Broadmeadow home 2-1.
When emergency services arrived shortly after 9:45, they had no way of telling if there was more than one person in the four-wheel drive. And given the way both vehicles wound up, police say it's still too early to identify exactly what happened on a stretch of highway they say isn't a black spot.
Well, we believe it was raining quite heavily, so we're assuming the road was quite slippery. Certainly we'd be looking at weather as being a factor, along with possibly speed.
A 21-year-old man from Maitland was driving the Pajero. He died instantly. The impact was with such force, 2 heavy lifting trucks were needed to divide the wreckage, which blocked the highway for most of the day, 10 kilometres south of Muswellbrook. What could make the resulting investigation that much harder is the lack of witnesses. At this stage, the only person who saw the actual collision is the 49-year-old driver of the tilt tray tow truck. He was taken to Muswellbrook Hospital with minor injuries.
But we are asking for any other witnesses that may have seen the accident to come forward and contact Muswellbrook Police.
Adam McIlrick, NBN News.
Featuring heavy-handed protests, political issues and a lucky escape, this year's Best Shootout film is about a very lost pope in Newcastle. Its creators were pinching themselves today, not only to stay awake from the exhausting competition, but because they didn't dream of winning.
We loved our film, but there were so many great films up there. We were just honoured to be in the top 10 and to actually win just flabbergasted every one of us.
Over 100 teams from around Australia raced against the clock in the Shootout Festival, where they're given 24 hours to make a short film. Over 10 years, the festival has received over 1,300 entries.
We had a new festival in the Netherlands, in The Hague, last month, which is quite incredible. Our first lot of films made in a foreign language. So I guess it's all about going forward and going further afield and making Newcastle the home.
As for the Pope, well, he made it home just fine. Lucy Wilson, NBN News.
The protest started at daybreak, 5 people locking onto coal loading equipment in Kooragang Island. It's the second day demonstrations against coal mining and climate change have been held in Newcastle. This afternoon, protesters took their action to the streets, with around 100 marching on Hunter MP Michael Costa's office in opposition to the state's plan to privatise the electricity industry. They then rallied in Civic Park. In Mayfield, one group began guerrilla gardening, planting trees and shrubs in a statement against climate change, and banners were dropped over the city's main street. While there's no doubt protesters caused some disruption, they fell short of achieving their goal to bring the Hunters coal chain to a halt, an enormous police operation apparently foiling their efforts.
It's now been 2 days solid of working in that sort of environment. It's frustrating, but I'm very proud. I've seen a lot of professional behaviour.
Late this afternoon, 4 people stormed the coal train line at the Carrington terminal. 2 locked onto the line, 1 chained himself to a pole, while this woman was content to simply run along the tracks. In all, 63 people have been arrested.
And really that just demonstrates the level of commitment in the community for people who are really frustrated that too little has been done.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
Bert Huber and the Pope are the same age, born just 3 weeks apart. But the 81-year-old from Newcastle would never have guessed his classmate would turn out to be the spiritual leader of the Roman Catholic Church.
That little what's-her-name is the Pope now. If you would have told me those days, you wouldn't believe it.
They both grew up in the southeastern Bavarian village of Traunstein and went to this school where they shared the one class with 90 other pupils.
We were a big class, and I don't remember many of them, but Joseph is the one who sticks out. Yeah. Because he was a little tiny fella, very humble, and what we knew from the teachers, very, very brainy.
At 14 years old, they were both enrolled in the Hitler Youth and then at 16 trained in separate anti-aircraft batteries. Bert reckons he never actually managed to hit anything, and the future Pope was released from service to follow his desire to be a priest. It was that desire that apparently made him a bit of a loner.
He was a Catholic, you know, and that didn't mix too well. Huh? Maybe that's one thing, maybe he wasn't too popular with the other boys.
But all these years later, Bert still raises a chuckle when he thinks of the first time he clapped eyes on the Pope-to-be wearing his eye-catching winter wardrobe.
Shorts to the knees and hand-knitted stockings. That's little things after 70 or odd years I still can remember it like it was yesterday.
Paul Lobb, NBN News.
The Crutches give it away. Wes Nguama will be on them for another 3 weeks thanks to a broken bone in his foot and out of the game for up to 5. Kubavuna could well replace him in the number 1 jumper, so too Aku Uati, a player everyone at the club has been waiting to see in the top grade.
I'm excited, I can't wait for him to get a crack. Obviously he's freak talent and he deserves a spot, and if he does get it this week I'm sure he'll go well.
But the man who makes the final decision is wary of throwing the youngster in at the wrong time.
He's going to play. You know, at some stage he's going to play. It's just a matter of trying to pick the right game for a young guy to make a debut.
This guy might make his at the club next year. The 19-year-old utility is well advanced in negotiations with the Knights for next season, and a decision on Orana Tamata's future is expected by next week.
I've had a meeting with him and I like the look of him and I've got a good feel from him. He's strong and he's fast and he's got ambition.
The club's photo call today seemed a bit premature, given their recruitment drive is still to bear fruit in terms of securing key overseas signings.
A little bit déjà vu, if you ask me. I think we were in this situation last year.
If you sensed a hint of frustration in the A-League Player of the Year, you'd be right. Now touted as the club's marquee for this season, it's news to Joel Griffiths as contract talks to extend his deal remain on hold.
I think everyone knows that the ball is in their court and there's nothing more I can do.
The coach reckons there's plenty some of his younger players can do, starting this weekend in a pre-season cup match against Perth. He felt several were intimidated by their more experienced Mariners opposition in Canberra at the weekend, but says that's no excuse for those wanting to crack a spot in the senior team and has called for more self-belief.
If they do that, then they may get more game time, but until they show that, then it's going to be very, very hard for them to press claims for a regular first-team spot.
Just if and when a Cameroon and Swedish player front up for their team photos remains to be seen.
The proposal to sell the old cinema has outraged the Friends of the Regal Group.
Well, it takes no account of the community interest. I think we do need to remember that the land on which the building stands, which is now in council ownership, was originally donated to the community.
Not only that, they say the cinema itself was built entirely by volunteers using donated materials.
There's no conception of the idea that it's perhaps morally not their land to sell. It belongs to the people of Newcastle.
The group wants the land retained by Newcastle City Council and a multi-purpose centre with student accommodation and a new art house theatre built on the site. But council says selling to a developer could be the only way that plan is made a reality.
I don't believe that the ratepayers of Newcastle should be providing a theatre of any type of this nature. But by the same token, if we can facilitate that at no cost to ratepayers, well then that's what we should be trying to do.
Councillors will decide the cinema's fate tonight. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
There's no end in sight to the skills shortage facing the country, but in a bid to replenish its workforce, Energy Australia is seeking to recruit about 160 apprentices statewide.
The demand for electricity is growing faster than the population, so people are, there's a bigger demand on our network the whole time, and we need to have more people to build it and maintain it.
And you don't just have to be a 16-year-old looking to get out of the classroom and find a trade, anyone is welcome.
There's no prerequisites other than people who are enthusiastic, like a hands-on job, perhaps outdoor work as well. If they've got all of those attributes, then we'll train them up in everything else they need to know.
There's a particular push to recruit more women. Just 5% of Energy Australia's apprentices are female.
We currently don't have a huge number of women in the trades, but it is increasing.
The retailer runs dedicated training centres in Newcastle and Muswellbrook to help its apprentices get ahead.
The apprenticeship program at Energy Australia covers our three main electrical trades. It's line work, cable jointing and electricians, as well as a few ancillary trades that support the business like vehicle bodybuilders and motor mechanics.
As for what you'll be paid, successful applicants can expect a wage above the award. Registration for exams closes July 24.
Colburn painter Greg Wilson's walls are filled with art that exudes colour, life and energy. He has many famous portraits to his credit, but possibly the most recognisable is Nelson Mandela. Greg was asked to paint a portrait of the ageing freedom fighter by an African charity, of which Mandela is patron. So, with Cockatiel Jesse on his shoulder, he painted three, two to be auctioned for charity and one for Mandela as a birthday gift.
Just a really powerful image. Of happiness, I suppose, and freedom. And there's another one where he was just released from jail, and you could tell he was quite exhausted. It's got a black background. It's just, I suppose, just reflective of just the pain and everything that he sort of went through in the 27 years he was in captivity.
Having narrowly survived his own personal battle with depression, Greg says he can identify with Mandela's struggle.
I feel very privileged to be part of this, and hopefully one day get to meet the guy. Yeah, thanks.
Jess reckons too?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jess. Might paint her.
Greg will travel to South Africa to meet Mandela next year. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
He comes in and out of the house whenever he wants, really, but usually in the evening time he's in, lying where he is now, watching TV with me.
You know, there's 3 broken thumbs and a broken wrist and now a broken foot, and they're all non-preventables. You know, there's nothing we can do about those. It's just the luck of the draw.
On Australian duty for most of the A-League off-season, Tarek Elrich has only enjoyed a week's break since Newcastle's grand final win, and even that was spent training in pursuit of reaching the Olympics.
I'm not complaining, you know, I can come back into the season feeling fit, strong and healthy, so it's all good. That's life, you know, you've got to carry on and get on with life, and back at Jets, and the bonus that comes out of that is that I get to play round 1 with the Jets.
Not one to dwell on lost chances, Elrich prefers to look ahead, and round 1 can't come quick enough. That'll be against arch rivals Central Coast, and given the losing grand finalists also sport an Elrich of their own in older brother Ahmed, the derby will carry significance of family proportions.
We've been talking about it for ages, and the family's all pumped up, and my parents really don't like Central Coast Mariners. I don't think anyone in the family does because they're our rivals.
Coming off a watershed season, Tarek knows a lot will be expected of him this season, especially given the Jets' player turnover. The club won't have captain Jade North or James Holland on deck for the season opener, given they depart for Olympic duty on Thursday.
It's the Olympics, it's massive, and we're going to be playing great teams and some great players like the likes of Messi and Riquelme.
It's my second Olympics. Not many people get to go, but going twice, so I'm pretty happy about that.
We'll have more on their Olympic journey in NBN News tomorrow night.